At 11:45 p.m., I was on my way to the airport for a business trip when my neighbor suddenly called. "Are you home?" she asked, her voice filled with panic. "What happened? I'm leaving for a trip," I replied. After a brief silence, she whispered, "I heard screaming coming from inside your house. You need to come back right now." I immediately turned the car around, but when I arrived, police cars had surrounded my home. Then the officer looked at me and said something that changed my life forever. "It means the world to me that you chose to spend your time here today. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country?" I read every single one. Here at Revenge, Dad, every story exists to remind us what truly matters. Note this story includes fictional elements for educational and entertainment purposes. Any similarity to real names or locations is purely coincidental, but the lesson inside is something worth keeping. I never thought the last business trip of my career would be the night my entire world collapsed. My name is Richard Hayes. I am 67 years old, a retired structural engineer who spent 40 years building things meant to last: bridges, schools, apartment complexes across Los Angeles County. I built them with my hands, my calculations, my sweat. And 35 years ago, I built something I was even more proud of: a life with my wife Evelyn in a 3-bedroom house on Marengo Avenue in Pasadena, California. That house was not just a property. Every brick in the front wall I had personally inspected. The oak tree in the corner of the yard I had planted the spring we moved in. The wooden fence along the side gate I had repainted with my son, Michael, the summer he turned 12. He had complained the whole morning about missing his baseball game, but by afternoon he was laughing and flicking paint at my shirt. I had kept that shirt for years afterward. That was the life I believed in. That was the man I thought I had raised. On the evening of Friday, the 4th of July weekend in 2025, I was dragging my suitcase toward the front door at 11:45 at night, heading to Los Angeles International Airport for one last consulting job in Phoenix. A final favor for an old colleague before I closed that chapter of my life completely. Evelyn had kissed me goodbye an hour earlier and gone to bed. The house was quiet. The neighborhood was quiet. Even the summer air felt still. Then my phone rang. The name on the screen read Margaret Holloway, my neighbor from directly across the street. Margaret was 71 years old, sharp as a tack, and never called past 9 in the evening unless something was genuinely wrong. I answered immediately. "Margaret, what's going on?" Her voice hit me like a bucket of cold water. She was breathing hard the way people breathe when they are trying not to panic and failing completely. "Richard," she said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I heard screaming coming from inside your house. I heard Evelyn's voice, and then I heard something crash, something heavy, and then it went quiet. Richard, I already called 911. They're on their way. You need to come home right now." My suitcase hit the porch floor before she finished the sentence. I do not remember the exact words I said to her. I remember getting into my car. I remember my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. I remember running every yellow light on Colorado Boulevard because something primal inside me, something that 40 years of careful engineering discipline had never fully suppressed, was screaming at me to get back to my wife. The drive from the airport departure lane to Marengo Avenue should have taken 11 minutes. I made it in 7, but when I turned onto my street, I stopped breathing entirely. There were 4 Los Angeles Police Department patrol cars parked in front of my house, their red and blue lights slicing through the warm summer darkness. Neighbors had come out onto their porches. A yellow perimeter tape was being stretched across my front walkway. An ambulance was idling at the curb, its rear doors hanging open. I pulled over, threw the car into park, and ran. A uniformed officer stepped directly into my path before I reached the front gate. He was young, maybe late 20s, with his hand raised flat against my chest. "Sir, I need you to stop right there. That is my house," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "My wife is in there. Where is my wife?" "Sir, what is your name?" "Richard Hayes. I live here. Where is Evelyn?" The officer spoke into his radio, then looked back at me with an expression that made my stomach drop straight to the ground. "Mr. Hayes, your wife has been transported to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. She was conscious when the paramedics arrived. But I need you to stay right here. Detective Ochoa wants to speak with you." A second man was already walking toward me from the front porch, broad-shouldered mid-40s with dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He wore a plain gray jacket and held a small notepad loosely in one hand. He did not offer his hand. "Mr. Hayes," he said, I'm Detective Ray Ochoa, LAPD. Thank you for coming back quickly. I have a few questions for you. I want to go to the hospital, I said. I need to see my wife. I understand that, Ochoa said, and his tone was not unkind, but it was firm in a way that told me he was not making a suggestion. But before that happens, I need to establish a few things. Can you tell me where you were this evening between 9 p.m. and midnight? Something tightened in my chest. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling of standing on a job site and hearing a crack in a beam you were certain was solid. I was getting ready to leave for the airport, I said slowly. I've been home all evening. Evelyn went to bed around 10:30. I finished packing, called a colleague in Phoenix around 11, and was heading to my car when Margaret called me. Ochoa wrote something down. Is there anyone who can confirm your whereabouts inside the home during that window? Before I could answer, I heard footsteps on the porch behind him, and when I looked past Detective Ochoa's shoulder, my heart cracked straight down the middle. Michael was standing at the edge of the porch just outside the yellow tape. My son, 38 years old. Wearing a dark blue jacket I had never seen before, his eyes red at the rims, his shoulders hunched forward in a posture of grief so perfectly constructed that for half a second, just half a second, I almost believed it. He looked at me across the distance between us, and his voice broke on cue. "Dad," he said. "I didn't want this to happen. I'm so sorry." I stood very still. In 40 years of engineering, I had learned to read structures. I had learned to look past the surface to finish, past the paint and the plaster, and find the truth in the bones of a thing. And standing there on my own front walkway with the police lights painting everything in coal blue and red, I looked at my son's face and felt something shift inside me with the quiet, terrible certainty of a load-bearing wall giving way. Those were not real tears. That was a performance. And whatever was happening tonight, Michael had known it was coming long before I pulled onto this street. Ochoa turned back to me and said something I would hear replaying in my mind for weeks afterward. He looked at me directly, not unkindly, but without hesitation, and said, "Mr. Hayes, your wife has been injured inside your home, and right now, you are our primary suspect." Those words landed on me, the way a structural collapse sounds from the inside, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet total giving way of everything I thought was solid. I looked at my son one more time. Michael dropped his gaze first. Detective Ochoa did not give me time to think. He stepped to the side and gestured toward the nearest patrol car with the calm, practiced efficiency of a man who had done this hundreds of times before. "Mr. Hayes, this way, please." I did not move immediately. My eyes were still fixed on Michael, still standing at the edge of the porch, with his shoulders curved inward and his hands hanging at his sides. He would not look at me anymore. He was staring at the ground, his jaw working slowly, as if he were rehearsing something he planned to say to someone else. "Mr. Hayes?" Ochoa's voice carried a quiet warning. I turned and walked toward the patrol car. The officer behind me, young, maybe 26, with close-cropped hair and nervous hands, reached for my wrist before I reached the vehicle. I felt the cold metal of the handcuffs before I fully understood what was happening. One click, then another. I stopped walking. I looked down at my hands. These were the hands that had drafted load calculations for the Foothill Freeway overpass expansion in 1994. These were the hands that had caught Evelyn when she slipped on the ice outside our hotel in Chicago on our 10th anniversary. These were the hands that had held Michael the night he was born, this tiny, terrifying, perfect thing. And I had stood in that hospital room, shaking so hard the nurse had laughed and told me to sit down before I fainted. And now there was cold steel around my wrists, and my son was standing 30 feet away, watching it happen, and he was not saying a single word to stop it. The pain that moved through my chest in that moment was not anger. It was something older and deeper than anger, the kind of hurt that does not announce itself loudly, but settles into the bones, like winter, the kind you know will still be there long after everything else has faded. I forced myself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth. 40 years of standing on job sites in 100-degree heat, in freezing rain, in the middle of arguments with contractors twice my size. I had learned a long time ago that the moment you lose control of your breathing, you lose control of everything else. Michael finally moved. He stepped down from the porch, crossing the front yard toward Ochoa, with his hands pressed together in front of him, his voice dropping into something soft and pained that carried just far enough for me to hear. "Detective, I want you to know this is not easy for me. He's my father, but lately he's been different. Angry in ways I've never seen before. Mom called me 2 weeks ago crying because she didn't know what to do. Ochoa listened. He wrote something down. Michael pressed forward, his voice thickening with what sounded like genuine emotion. She told me she was scared, detective. My own mother told me she was scared of her husband. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself it was just stress, that retirement had been hard on him, that he would come back to himself. But tonight... He paused, pressing 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. Tonight, I just couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I stared at my son. I had watched Michael perform before, school plays, job interviews he had called me about. Afterward, the elaborate story he had told Evelyn one Thanksgiving about why he had missed dinner, which we both later found out was completely fabricated. Michael had always had a gift for language, for wrapping uncomfortable truths in enough warmth and sorrow that people forgot to look at the edges. But this was different. This was not a story told to smooth over a missed holiday dinner. This was a story being told to a homicide detective on my front lawn, and every word of it was designed to put me in a cage. Ochoa finished writing and looked up. "Mr. Hayes," he said to me directly, "your son has indicated that there have been ongoing concerns about your behavior at home. I want to give you the opportunity to respond to that before we continue." My jaw tightened. I looked from Ochoa to Michael and back again. "My son," I said carefully, keeping my voice as level as I could manage, "has never once in the past 2 years sat down with me and expressed any concern about my behavior. Not once. He has, however, asked me on 3 separate occasions in the past 4 months about the property deed for this house. I thought nothing of it at the time. I am thinking considerably more of it right now." Something flickered across Michael's face. It was fast, a quarter second, maybe less, but I caught it. A crack in the performance, thin as a hairline fracture in a concrete pillar, but there. He recovered almost instantly. His eyes filled and his voice dropped to a register designed to sound heartbroken. "Dad, please don't do this. Don't make this uglier than it already is. I'm trying to protect Mom. That's all I've ever been trying to do." The word protect landed in my stomach like a stone thrown into still water. Protect. He had used that word deliberately, strategically, because he knew that if he framed everything as protection of Evelyn, protection of the family, protection of stability, anyone listening would assume the threat was coming from me. It was elegant, I had to admit. Quietly, coldly, brilliantly constructed. "Let's go, Mr. Hayes," Ochoa said, placing one hand lightly on my arm and guiding me toward the patrol car. I allowed myself to be guided, not because I was defeated. I was nowhere near defeated, but because I understood something that Michael had apparently forgotten in whatever calculations had brought him to my front porch tonight. I had spent 4 decades finding the hidden flaw in a structure before it failed. I knew how to be patient. I knew how to gather information before I made my move. And I knew with the absolute certainty of a man who has seen enough collapses to recognize one building in slow motion that whatever Michael had built tonight was going to come apart. The question was not whether. The question was when and how completely. The patrol car door closed behind me. Through the window, I watched my son turn back toward the house, rolling his shoulders back. As the performance relaxed off his body like a coat he no longer needed to wear, he pulled out his phone and began to dial someone. I pressed my cuffed hands together in my lap and began to think. The interrogation room at the LAPD Hollywood Division was exactly what you would expect if you had seen enough crime dramas on television, and nothing at all like what you would expect if you had actually sat inside one. It was smaller than I imagined. The table was metal bolted to the floor with 2 shallow scratches running diagonally across the surface that someone had tried and failed to buff out. The chair was hard plastic. The overhead light was the particular shade of white that makes everyone look like they have not slept in 3 days. In my case, that was simply the truth. Detective Ochoa sat across from me with a paper cup of coffee he never touched and a yellow legal pad covered in handwriting I could not read upside down. He had removed his jacket. He looked tired, but focused the way experienced investigators look when they are working a case they have not yet decided how to feel about. He started with the simple questions. Where had I been all evening? When had I last seen Evelyn? Had we argued recently? Was there any history of conflict in the home? I answered every single one without hesitation, without contradicting myself, without the kind of nervous verbal backtracking that Ochoa was clearly trained to listen for. I told him about the Phoenix consulting job, the colleague I had called at 11 p.m., whose name and number I offered without being asked, the suitcase still sitting on my front porch, where I had dropped it when Margaret called. Ochoa wrote everything down. Then he reached under the legal pad and pulled out a manila folder. He placed it on the table between us and opened it slowly. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "your son provided this to our department 3 days ago, before last night occurred." I leaned forward. Inside the folder was a document unlike anything I had ever expected to see, with my own name attached to it. It was typed, formatted, dated not a casual note, but a structured report, the kind a person prepares when they want something to look official. It covered a period of 6 months. It listed specific dates and times. It described incidents of what it called erratic behavior, moments of confusion, episodes of sudden anger, an occasion in March when I had allegedly thrown a glass across the kitchen, another in May when I had supposedly locked Evelyn out of the bedroom for 2 hours. None of it had happened. Not one incident. Not one date. Not one glass. My hands pressed flat against the tabletop. I could feel my jaw tightening, could feel the heat crawling up the back of my neck, and I made myself breathe through it, slow and deliberate, because I understood with absolute clarity that losing my composure in this room, at this table, in front of this detective, was precisely what that document had been designed to make me do. "Detective Ochoa," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "I would like you to look at that document very carefully. Look at the formatting. Look at the consistency of the language. Look at the level of detail. And then I want you to ask yourself, does this read like a worried son keeping informal notes? Or does this read like someone who spent considerable time preparing a legal record?" Ochoa looked at me for a long moment without writing anything down. "Mr. Hayes," he said finally, "is there anyone who can corroborate your version of events during the incidents described in this report?" "Every single one," I said, "because none of them occurred." He studied me, the way you study a blueprint when you suspect the measurements are off, but cannot yet identify exactly where. Then he closed the folder. At 3:58 in the morning, Ochoa stood up, collected his legal pad, and told me I was free to go. No charges. Insufficient evidence. I could retrieve my personal items from the front desk. I walked out of that building into the warm Los Angeles night, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my hand pressed hard against my sternum, because the feeling expanding in my chest was so large and so tangled, fury and grief and something that felt almost like vertigo, that I genuinely did not know which direction it was going to take me. Michael had spent 6 months building that document, 6 months of quiet, deliberate preparation. While he was calling me on Sunday afternoons to ask how my knee was holding up, while he was sitting at our Thanksgiving table eating Evelyn's sweet potato pie, he had been constructing a case against me. I sat down on the front steps of the police station in the middle of the night, and for the first time since Margaret's phone call, I let myself feel the full weight of what that meant. Then I picked up my phone and called Frank Dalton. I have walked into hospitals before under difficult circumstances: when my mother passed, when Frank had his bypass surgery 4 years ago, when Evelyn's sister broke her hip on a patch of black ice in Glendale. I know the particular quality of light inside those buildings, the way it flattens everything, the way the smell of antiseptic and recycled air sits in the back of your throat. I know how to move through those corridors and hold myself together. But walking into Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at 8 o'clock that Saturday morning, carrying a small bunch of yellow carnations I had grabbed from a gas station on Wilshire Boulevard, because I could not show up to my wife's hospital room empty-handed, I felt something I had never felt in a hospital before. I felt afraid to open the door. I stood outside room 412 for almost a full minute with my hand on the doorframe, the carnations hanging at my side, telling myself to move. The night had left marks on me that I could not fully inventory: the cold of the handcuffs, the overhead light in the interrogation room, the image of Michael rolling his shoulders back as the patrol car pulled away, the performance dissolving off him like stage makeup at the end of a show. I pushed the door open. Evelyn was lying in the bed closest to the window, an IV line running into the back of her left hand, a thin cotton blanket pulled up to her waist. She looked smaller than she did at home. She always looked smaller in hospitals, as if the institution itself had a way of reducing people to their most basic and fragile version. She turned her head when she heard the door, and the sound she made a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, her whole body pulling back against the pillow, her free hand gripping the bed rail so hard her knuckles went white, hit me like a physical blow directly to the center of my chest. She was afraid of me. My wife of 35 years, the woman who had held my hand through my father's funeral and talked me down from quitting my job 3 separate times, and slow danced with me in our kitchen on a Tuesday night in February, just because a song she liked came on the radio. She looked at me and she flinched. The carnations slipped from my fingers. I did not notice them hit the floor. "Evelyn," I said, and my voice cracked on her name in a way I had not heard from myself since the night Michael was born. "Evelyn, it's me. It's Richard." A woman stepped forward from the far side of the room. Solid build, natural gray at her temples, wearing navy blue scrubs, and the expression of someone who had seen this particular kind of damage before and taken it seriously. "Mrs. Hayes," she said gently, placing her hand over Evelyn's on the bed rail. "It's your husband. You're safe." "I'm Gloria Barnes," she said to me quietly without extending her hand. "I've been with Mrs. Hayes since she was admitted last night." I nodded. I could not speak yet. Evelyn's grip on the bed rail loosened slowly, the way a fist unclenches after holding something too tightly for too long. She blinked. Then she blinked again. And then something shifted behind her eyes, recognition flooding back in, and she made a sound that broke me completely open. She burst into tears. Not quiet tears, not dignified tears. She sobbed the way people sob when something they have been holding at arm's length for a very long time finally crashes through every defense they have built, heaving, gasping, her whole body shaking with it, her free hand reaching out toward me with a desperation that made my throat close entirely. I crossed the room in 3 steps and took her hand in both of mine and held on. "Richard," she managed between sobs, squeezing my fingers so hard it hurt, and I was grateful for the pain because it was real and it was ours. "Richard, it wasn't you. It was never you. I need you to know that. It was never you." "I know," I said. My own eyes were burning. I pressed her hand against my jaw and held it there. "I know, sweetheart. I know." We stayed like that for a long moment, her crying and me holding on, Gloria Barnes standing quietly near the door, giving us the space that only someone who truly understands grief knows how to give. When Evelyn's breathing finally slowed, when the shaking in her shoulders settled into something manageable, she pulled back enough to look at my face. Her eyes were swollen and red, her cheeks wet, but her gaze was clear and direct in a way that told me whatever had happened last night had not broken her. "It was Michael," she said. Her voice was steady now, the steadiness of someone who has made a decision. "He came to the house at 11 o'clock. He said he wanted to talk, but he went straight to your office, Richard. He went straight into the filing cabinet." My jaw tightened. "What was he looking for?" "The property documents," she said. "The deed, the trust paperwork, everything your father left us." Her chin trembled, but she held it. "When I told him to stop, he got angry. He said I didn't understand that he was trying to help us, that we were too old to be managing everything ourselves." A tear slid down her cheek, and she wiped it away with the back of her wrist. "I told him to leave, and then everything happened very fast." Gloria stepped forward, then her voice low and professional. "Mr. Hayes, I want you to know that I have filed a report with the hospital's patient advocacy team regarding the circumstances of Mrs. Hayes' admission. There are indicators here that I am required to document under California's elder abuse reporting statutes. Someone from the team will be in contact with you." I looked at Gloria Barnes and felt a wave of gratitude so sudden and so strong it nearly knocked me sideways. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for looking after her." Gloria gave me a small nod and stepped out, pulling the door closed behind her. Evelyn reached up and touched my face with her free hand, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw the way she had done 10,000 times before, and this time I could not stop the tears from coming. They came quietly without drama, the way water comes through a crack in a dam that has been holding for too long. "What was he looking for?" "Richard," she asked again, softer this time. "What does he actually want?" I covered her hand with mine and held it against my cheek, and I told her the truth, the only truth I was certain of in that moment. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm going to find out." I did not go back inside the house that afternoon. I had driven back to Marengo Avenue after leaving the hospital, pulled into the driveway, out of habit, cut the engine, and then simply sat there. The suitcase I had dropped on the porch the night before was still there, sitting upright beside the front door, where a patrol officer had apparently set it after I was taken away. Nobody had moved it. Nobody had brought it inside. It just sat there in the July heat, like a question I did not yet know how to answer. The front wall of the house caught the afternoon light, the way it always did. At this hour, the red brick going warm and amber, the mortar lines casting thin shadows that shifted as the sun moved. I had mixed that mortar myself in the summer of 1987. Standing in this same driveway in old jeans and a shirt Evelyn kept threatening to throw away, while a radio on the porch played something by Creedence Clearwater Revival, and Michael, who was not yet born, was still just a hope Evelyn and I talked about on Sunday mornings over coffee. I had built this wall to last 100 years. I had believed with the same certainty I brought to every structure I ever designed that my family would last at least that long. The oak tree in the corner of the yard had grown considerably since I planted it. Its roots had pushed up a section of the front walkway in the past few years, something I kept meaning to address and never quite getting around to. Michael had pointed it out to me last Thanksgiving, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, shaking his head with that particular expression of tolerant exasperation that adult children sometimes direct at their aging parents. "Dad, someone's gonna trip on that, you know?" he had said. "You really need to get that fixed." I had laughed and told him I would get to it in the spring. He had been standing on this porch drinking my coffee, pointing at my walkway, and somewhere in the back of his mind, behind that expression of tolerant concern, he had already been calculating what this property was worth on the open market. My chest tightened so severely that I had to press my fist against my sternum and breathe through it. I had given Michael everything I had to give. Not everything in the financial sense, though. I had given him plenty in that regard, too. The college tuition, the loan for his first business venture that he never fully repaid, the down payment assistance for the apartment in Silver Lake that he had sold 3 years later at a profit, without mentioning the sale to me until long after the fact. I had given him my time and my patience and my belief in him, even when that belief required a level of willful blindness that I am not proud of now. I had given him the summer afternoons, teaching him how to read a level and drive a nail straight and understand why a foundation matters more than anything you build on top of it. And he had taken all of it and built something with it that I never imagined, something designed to hollow me out from the inside. I pressed the back of my head against the headrest and stared at the ceiling of the car. My eyes were burning again. I was not going to cry a second time today. I had used up that particular resource at the hospital, sitting beside Evelyn with her hand pressed against my jaw, and I did not have it in me again so soon. What I had instead was something harder and quieter. I had been an engineer for 40 years. I had walked onto job sites where the previous contractor had made catastrophic errors, hidden behind drywall, buried under concrete, disguised by fresh paint, and I had learned to find every single one of them, not by shouting, not by accusing, by looking carefully, by following the evidence where it led, no matter how far that was from where I expected to end up. Michael had made errors. He had been confident enough or desperate enough that he had not covered them all. I picked up my phone. Frank Dalton answered on the second ring, the way he always did, as if he had been expecting the call. Frank was 69 years old, a retired certified public accountant who had spent 35 years untangling the financial records of companies that did not want their records untangled. We had been friends since our daughters were in the same third-grade class at McKinley Elementary, and in 30 years, I had never once heard Frank Dalton panic about anything. "Richard," he said, "I heard what happened. Margaret called me this morning." "I need your help, Frank," I said. "My son is trying to take everything Evelyn and I have built, and I need to understand exactly how he's planning to do it." There was a pause. Not hesitation. Frank did not hesitate. It was the pause of a man organizing his thoughts before he spoke, which was one of the things I had always respected most about him. He said, "Are you sure you want to know everything? Because in my experience, once you start pulling on a thread like this, you do not get to choose how far it unravels." I looked at the brick wall I had built in the summer of 1987, the wall that was still standing, the wall that would outlast every piece of equipment used to build it. "I need to know why my son wants to erase me from my own life, Frank," I said. "All of it, whatever it takes." Another pause. Then Frank said, "All right, come over tomorrow morning and bring whatever financial documents you have access to. We are going to start at the beginning." I ended the call and sat for another moment in the quiet of the car. Then I got out, picked up the suitcase from the front porch, and carried it back inside the house. 3 days after the worst night of my life, I crossed the street and knocked on Margaret Holloway's front door at 7:30 in the morning. She opened it before I finished knocking, which told me she had been watching for me. Margaret was like that observant in the way that People who have lived alone for a long time become observant, attuned to the rhythms of the street in ways that most people moving through their busy lives never bother to develop. She was dressed already gray hair, pinned back a mug of tea in her hand, and she looked at me with the kind of eyes that had clearly not slept well either. "Come in, Richard," she said. "I've been waiting for you." Her living room was exactly as I remembered it from the handful of times I had been inside over the years, crowded with the comfortable accumulation of a long life bookshelves, floor to ceiling. A orange tabby cat asleep on the arm of the sofa, framed photographs covering most of the available wall space. She had set up a laptop on the coffee table. The screen was already open. I pulled everything the camera recorded that night, she said, sitting down beside the coffee table and turning the laptop to face me. "I've had that system for 3 years. Motion-activated high definition, covers the full width of the street and both my neighbors' driveways." I sat down across from her, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. "Margaret Eastart," I said, "before you show me, I need you to understand what this might mean. If there's something on that footage that matters, I may need to ask you to share it with law enforcement, with an attorney, possibly eventually with a court." She looked at me steadily over the rim of her mug. "Richard," she said, "I called 911 the night I heard Evelyn screaming. I have been a witness in a property dispute in this neighborhood, and a character witness in a custody case for my niece. I am 71 years old, and I have never once in my life backed away from telling the truth about what I saw." She set her mug down. "Now, do you want to see the footage or not?" "Yes," I said. "Please." She pressed play. The timestamp in the upper right corner of the screen read 11:22 p.m. The image was sharp and clear, the street lit well enough by the corner lamp that details were visible without difficulty. For the first 2 minutes, nothing moved. The street was empty. My house sat across the way with the front lights on, exactly as I had left them. Then at 11:32 p.m. the front door of my house opened. A figure stepped out onto the porch. My jaw locked. The figure was male medium height, wearing a dark blue jacket, the same dark blue jacket I had seen on my son 3 days ago when he stood behind the police tape with manufactured grief on his face. He carried a bag over his left shoulder, the kind of large canvas tote Evelyn kept in the front closet for grocery runs, and it was full enough that he adjusted the strap twice as he came down the front steps. Michael crossed the porch, moved quickly down the front walk, and turned left on Marengo Avenue without looking back once. "Keep watching," Margaret said quietly. 30 seconds later, a dark sedan that had been parked 2 blocks down the street engine, running no lights, pulled slowly away from the curb and moved in the same direction Michael had walked. I straightened up. That car was waiting for him. "It was parked there from 9:14 p.m., Margaret said. She had already pulled up the earlier timestamp. 2 hours and 18 minutes before Michael left your house. The air went out of my lungs in a slow, controlled exhale that took considerable effort to keep steady. Michael had not arrived at my house on impulse. He had not come over on a sudden worried whim to check on his mother. He had come with a plan, a car waiting, a bag, ready a specific window of time, while he believed I was on my way to the airport and Evelyn was alone. This was not a mistake. This was not a moment of poor judgment. This was choreographed. "I want to give you a copy," Margaret said, already reaching for a small USB drive on the table beside the laptop. "I made 3. 1 for you, 1 I'm keeping, and 1 I already gave to my attorney for safekeeping." I took the drive from her and closed my fingers around it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message from an unknown number, 7 digits I did not recognize, with a message that stopped my breath entirely. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Sandra Cole. I think we need to talk. Please don't tell Michael. Sandra Cole, Michael's wife." I had never met Sandra Cole in person for more than 20 minutes at a time. She and Michael had been married for 4 years, and in those 4 years, there had been a handful of dinners. 2 Thanksgivings, 1 Christmas morning that ended early when Michael said Sandra was not feeling well, and a birthday lunch for Evelyn at a restaurant in Arcadia, where Sandra had smiled at all the right moments and said very little that I could remember afterward. She was 35. Slender with dark hair, she kept pulled back and a careful, watchful quality about her that I had always attributed to shyness. Sitting across from me now in a corner booth at a small coffee shop on Colorado Boulevard in Old Town, Pasadena, she did not look shy. She looked terrified. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup she had not touched since it arrived, her knuckles pale against the ceramic, her eyes moving to the door every 45 seconds, with the focused anxiety of someone who was genuinely afraid of being followed. She had arrived 8 minutes after I did slid into the booth without taking off her jacket and spent the first full minute just breathing. "Thank you for coming," she said finally. Her voice was lower than I remembered. I didn't know who else to call. "Sandra," I said carefully, "before you say anything else, I want you to know that whatever you tell me today stays between us unless you decide otherwise. I am not going to use you. I am not going to put you in a position you haven't chosen." Her eyes filled immediately and she pressed her lips together hard to hold herself back. "You're being kinder to me than you need to be," she said, "considering." "Considering what?" She exhaled shakily. "Considering that I've known something was wrong for months and I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself Michael was just stressed that he would figure it out, that maybe I was misreading the situation." A tear slid down her cheek and she caught it fast, almost angrily, with the back of her wrist. "I was not misreading the situation." "Tell me what you know," I said. Sandra reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn soft at the creases from being handled too many times. She unfolded it and smoothed it flat on the table between us. It was a torn page from a notepad covered in Michael's handwriting, blocky slanted the way he wrote when he was moving fast. A name, a phone number, and 3 words underneath. Victor Caldwell. A number with a 310 area code. And beneath that, in letters pressed hard enough to indent the paper, off-market cash only. "I found this in his jacket pocket 3 weeks ago when I was doing laundry," Sandra said. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I looked up the number. Victor Caldwell is a real estate broker. He specializes in off-market and residential sales in the Pasadena and San Marino area. She finally picked up her coffee cup, realized her hands were shaking too badly, and set it back down. "Off-market means the property never gets listed publicly, Richard. It means no MLS listing, no open houses, no paper trail that a casual search would find. Cash only means no mortgage lender asking questions about the title." My stomach dropped. "He's been on the phone late at night." Sandra continued, her voice dropping even lower. "I catch pieces of conversations when I walk past the office door. I've heard him say things like, the timeline is tight and the situation is being managed, and once the paperwork clears." I didn't understand what paperwork. I still don't know all of it. She looked up at me, and the expression on her face was one of the most painful things I had seen in a week, already full of painful things. The face of a woman who had loved someone and was only now allowing herself to see clearly what that person actually was. "But I know it's about your house, Richard. I know it involves money he doesn't have. And I know it's moving fast." "How much does he owe?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know the full amount, but 3 months ago I found a letter in his desk from a private lending company based in Nevada. The tone of it wasn't friendly. It mentioned consequences. It mentioned a deadline." Her chin trembled once before she steadied it. "I put it back where I found it because I was scared of what it meant. I have been scared ever since." I looked at the piece of paper on the table between us, Michael's handwriting. Victor Caldwell's name. 3 words pressed so hard into the page that the pen had nearly gone through. "Sandra," I said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Are you coming to me because you want to protect Michael, or because you want to protect yourself?" The question landed hard. I watched her absorb it, watched the conflict move across her face, loyalty fighting with self-preservation, love fighting with the clear-eyed recognition of what love had actually gotten her. "Both," she said at last honestly. "And I'm ashamed of that. But mostly I'm here because what he's doing to you and Evelyn is wrong, and I cannot keep pretending I don't know that." I reached across the table and picked up the piece of paper. "Thank you, Sandra," I said. "Go home, act normally. Don't tell Michael we spoke." I folded the paper carefully and put it in my shirt pocket directly over my heart. "And if you remember anything else, anything at all, you call me directly." She nodded, pressing both hands flat on the table to push herself upright, and I could see how much effort that small act of standing required. She was carrying something very heavy for a person her size. I watched her walk out the door into the July sunshine, and then I took out my phone and called Frank. "I have a name," I said when he picked up. "Victor Caldwell, real estate broker, off-market deals, Pasadena area. And Frank Michael is in debt to someone in Nevada, and the deadline is close. Start there." Frank Dalton's home office looked exactly the way you would expect the workspace of a man who had spent 35 years as a certified public accountant to look. and nothing at all the way you would expect the workspace of a retired man to look. There was no golf memorabilia, no fishing photographs, no comfortable clutter of a life winding pleasantly down. There were 4 monitors arranged in a semicircle on a desk the size of a dining table, 3 separate printers, 2 locked filing cabinets, and stacks of paper, organized with a precision that made my own desk look like a natural disaster. Frank had been retired for 6 years, and he worked harder than most people half his age. He just worked on things he chose now, which made all the difference. He was standing with his back to the door when I arrived, studying something on the center monitor with his reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. He did not turn around when I knocked on the open door frame. "Sit down, Richard," he said, "and brace yourself." I sat. Frank turned around, pulled his glasses down onto his nose, and picked up a thick folder from the corner of his desk. He did not sit. Frank never sat when he was presenting findings. He said it made him think less clearly, a habit from 30 years of standing at whiteboards in conference rooms, explaining financial irregularities to people who did not want to hear them. "I am going to start with what we know for certain," he said, "and work outward from there. Stop me if anything is unclear." "Oh, go ahead," I said. "Victor Caldwell." Frank opened the folder. "Licensed real estate broker, California Department of Real Estate license in good standing. Specializes in high-value off-market residential transactions in the Pasadena, San Marino, and Arcadia corridor. In the past 18 months, he has facilitated 4 off-market sales of properties valued above $1.5 million. All cash transactions. No MLS listings. No public record of buyer identity until the deed transfer is recorded." He looked at me over his glasses. "Michael contacted Caldwell 11 weeks ago. They have exchanged 43 text messages and 9 phone calls. Caldwell has a preliminary valuation on your house, Richard. $1.7 million, 63% of its actual market value." My back teeth pressed together hard enough to ache. "Michael is selling my house for 63 cents on the dollar," I said. "He needs the cash fast, and he needs no questions asked," Frank said. "Which brings me to the Nevada debt." He turned to the next page. "The private lending company is called Crestline Capital Solutions, registered in Clark County, Nevada. They are not a bank. They are not regulated by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. They operate in the gap between legal private lending and what most people would simply call loan sharking. Michael borrowed $380,000 from them 14 months ago at an interest rate of 22% compounded monthly." He paused to let that number land. "His current outstanding balance as of this week is $461,000. The deadline for full repayment is 22 days from today." The number sat in the air between us like a stone dropped in still water. $461,000, I repeated. "In 22 days, Frank said. "Or Crestline initiates collection procedures that I can assure you are not conducted through the court system." I pressed both hands flat on the arms of the chair. "How did he get into $460,000 of debt? Bad investments over 3 years," Frank said, moving to the next page without ceremony. 2 failed business partnerships, a speculative real estate deal in the Inland Empire that collapsed, and what appears to be a serious and sustained problem with high-stakes poker in the private club circuit in Los Angeles. He is not a gambling addict in the clinical sense, as far as I can determine, but he is a man who has been trying to win his way out of a financial hole for a very long time, and has only succeeded in digging it deeper." I said nothing. I was looking at the wall above Frank's desk and feeling the particular cold clarity that sometimes comes after shock has finished moving through you, and what is left behind is simply the facts laid out in front of you, like a structural assessment report. "Now," Frank said, and his voice shifted into the register he used when the news was about to get worse, "I need to show you something that moves this from a civil matter into criminal territory." He reached into the folder and pulled out a single printed page, placing it on the desk in front of me and turning it so I could read it clearly. It was a loan document. A home equity line of credit application submitted to Pacific Coast Federal Bank 8 weeks ago. The property listed as collateral was my house on Marengo Avenue. The amount requested was $200,000. The application had been approved and the funds had been disbursed. The signature on the application was mine. I had never signed that document in my life. "El HELOC," Frank said, "is a home equity line of credit. It allows a homeowner to borrow money using the equity in their property as collateral. Your house has significant equity, you paid it off 12 years ago. This application used that equity to borrow $200,000 from Pacific Coast Federal Bank. He tapped the signature line. That is not your signature, Richard. I have compared it against 6 authenticated samples of your handwriting, and the discrepancies are measurable and consistent. Michael hired someone to sign this. Based on the notarization stamp, I believe he found a notary public willing to authenticate a signature they did not actually witness, which in California is a criminal offense for the notary as well as for Michael. Where is the money? I asked. My voice came out very quiet. That is the part that makes this a federal crime, Frank said. He pulled out 3 more pages each one, a bank statement from a different institution. The $200,000 was dispersed to an account in Michael's name at a bank here in California. Within 48 hours, it was transferred to a second account at a bank in Arizona. 4 days after that, it moved again to a third account in Nevada. From the Nevada account, it was transferred into a limited liability company called MH Pacific Holdings, registered in the state of Nevada, with Michael listed as the sole member under a registered agent name. Frank looked at me directly. When you move money across state lines through the federal banking system, as part of a scheme to defraud that is wire fraud under federal law, Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1343. It carries a maximum sentence of 20 years per count in federal prison. The room felt very still. He did not just steal from us, Frank, I said. No, Frank said. He built a structure designed to make sure no one could trace it back to him without knowing exactly where to look. He closed the folder. He forgot that you know someone who spent 35 years knowing exactly where to look. I picked up the HELOC document and looked at the signature, my name in someone else's hand on a line that had cost my family $200,000 and my son whatever remained of his future. What do we do now? I asked. Frank picked up his phone. Now, he said, we call Diana Reeves. Before I reveal what Richard found hidden in those emails, something so calculated, so cold-blooded that it stopped him from breathing. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now, so I know you are still with me. Every single comment means more than you know. And a quick note, the story continuing from here contains some fictional elements woven in for educational purposes. The core of what you are about to hear may be difficult. If that is not for you, it is completely okay to step away now. The house was quiet in the way that houses only get quiet after 11 o'clock at night, when the neighborhood traffic has thinned and the air conditioning has cycled down. And the only sounds are the ones the building makes settling into itself, the small creaks and clicks of a structure that has been standing for 37 years and knows how to rest. Evelyn had gone to bed at 9:30. She was sleeping better than she had in the hospital, which was something though. She still woke twice most nights, and I could hear her moving through the hallway, checking that the front door was locked, checking that the windows were latched the way people move through their own homes, when the place that was supposed to be safest has been made to feel uncertain. I sat alone in my office with the desk lamp on and the door pulled halfway closed and Diana Reeves's email open on my laptop screen. Diana had sent it at 9:47 p.m. with the subject line "Subpoena, Return M. Hayes email records." Attached was a compressed file containing 6 months of Michael's outgoing email correspondence obtained legally through the court subpoena Diana had filed the same afternoon Frank called her. The email provider had complied within 48 hours. That was 2 days ago. I had been working through the file steadily since then, reading in order, oldest to newest, the way you read a set of engineering drawings starting from the foundation and working up. I had thought I understood what Michael had done. I had not understood the half of it. The early emails were almost mundane in their calculation messages to Victor Caldwell, asking about comparable off-market sales in the Pasadena corridor, questions about typical closing timelines for cash transactions, a careful inquiry about whether a property could be transferred without the co-owner's signature if one party held power of attorney. Caldwell's responses were professional and measured the replies of a broker who asked no unnecessary questions and offered no unnecessary opinions. Then came the emails to Crestline Capital Solutions in Nevada. Reading them in sequence was like watching a man slowly realize he is standing on ice that has already begun to crack. The early messages were confident assurances that the collateral was secured, that the timeline was manageable, that Michael Hayes was a man of considerable resources who simply required a short-term bridge loan to cover a temporary liquidity gap. The later messages were something else entirely, the language shortened. The explanations became repetitive. One email sent at 2:37 in the morning 6 weeks ago contained a single paragraph that made the hair on my arms stand up. I understand the consequences of default. I am asking for 14 more days. The asset will be liquidated. I give you my word. My word. My son had pledged his word to a private lender in Nevada, using my house as the collateral that backed it. I pushed back from the desk and pressed both fists against my mouth and breathed through my nose for a long moment, because the anger moving through me was the kind that needed somewhere to go, and there was nowhere for it to go, at 11 o'clock at night, in a quiet house where my wife was trying to sleep. Then I pulled the laptop back toward me and kept reading. The email that broke me was not one of the financial ones. It was buried in the middle of the file, sent on a Tuesday afternoon in late May to an address I did not recognize. I clicked on the recipient name, and the autofill showed the full address admissions at Hillside Care and Recovery, San Bernardino, California. I knew the name. Hillside Care and Recovery was a private residential facility in San Bernardino County, roughly 70 miles east of Pasadena. I had driven past the exit on the 10 freeway without ever having reason to think about what was behind it. The email read, "Good afternoon. I am writing to inquire about the admission process for an elderly female family member who may require residential care in the near future. She is 64 years of age and generally good physical health, but experiencing significant cognitive and emotional instability that makes independent living increasingly unsafe. I am her son, and I am beginning to explore options for her care and housing on her behalf. Could you please send information regarding your intake process, your visitation policies, and your protocols for managing patients who may initially resist placement? Patients who may initially resist placement." I read that sentence 4 times. My hands were shaking by the 3rd time. By the 4th, I had to set the laptop down on the desk and stand up, because the alternative was putting my fist through the wall, and I was 67 years old with a history of minor arthritis in my right hand, and I was not going to do that. I walked to the window and stood there looking out at the front yard in the darkness, the oak tree, the repaired section of walkway I had finally gotten around to fixing last spring, the brick wall that caught the streetlight, the way it caught the afternoon sun, going warm and amber even in the dark. Evelyn was asleep 30 feet away down the hallway. Michael had been writing emails about residential placement protocols for patients who resist while sitting at Thanksgiving dinner and eating her sweet potato pie, while calling her every Sunday to ask how she was feeling, while standing on this porch and pointing at the uneven walkway with tolerant filial concern. The grief that moved through me then was not the sharp, hot kind. It was the cold, settling kind, the kind that finds the spaces between things and fills them permanently, the kind that changes the shape of a room without moving any of the furniture. I went back to the desk. I sat down. I closed the email. Then I opened a new window and typed a text message to Evelyn's number, even though she was asleep and would not see it until morning. "I love you. We are going to be all right. I promise." I pressed send, closed the laptop, and sat in the quiet of my office for a long time. When I finally heard Evelyn's footsteps in the hallway, the familiar soft pad of her slippers on the hardwood, I did not move. She pushed the office door open the rest of the way and stood in the frame in her robe, looking at me with eyes that were still half asleep, but that saw me clearly enough. "Richard," she said, "come to bed." I looked at my wife, standing in the doorway of the home we had built together in the house Michael had been planning to sell out from under her while she slept, and I felt something harden in my chest with the slow, absolute finality of concrete setting. "In a minute," I said. "There's one more thing I need to do first." I picked up my phone and sent a text message to Diana Reeves. "I have read everything. We need to talk in the morning. All of it. I am ready." Then I got up, turned off the desk lamp, and followed my wife down the hallway to bed. I made coffee at 6:15 the next morning. Not because I had slept well. I had not slept well in 8 days, and I had stopped expecting to. But because making coffee was something I knew how to do, something with clear steps and a predictable outcome. And at 6:15 in the morning, with everything I was carrying, predictable outcomes felt like a form of grace. Evelyn came down at 6:40 in her blue robe, her hair not yet pinned, moving through the kitchen with the careful economy of someone whose body is still catching up to being awake. She looked better than she had in the hospital. The swelling around her eyes had gone down. The careful, braced quality that had been in her posture since she came home was still there, but it was lessening the way a splint loosens when the bone beneath it begins to hold. She looked at the 2 cups already on the table. She looked at me. "You want to tell me something?" she said. It was not a question. Yes, I said. Sit down, sweetheart, please. She sat. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She looked at me with eyes that were ready, not eager, not afraid, but ready in the way that people who have already survived something very hard become ready for the next hard thing, because they have learned that looking away does not make it smaller. I opened the laptop. I took her through it in order the way I had taken it, in starting with Victor Caldwell and the off-market valuation, moving through Crestline Capital, and the $461,000 debt, explaining the HELOC, and what a home equity line of credit meant in plain terms, showing her the 3 shell accounts, and Frank's documentation of how the money had moved across state lines. I explained what wire fraud meant under federal law. I explained what a court subpoena was, and how Diana had obtained the emails legally. Evelyn listened to all of it without interrupting once. Her face did not collapse. It did not crumble the way I had feared it might. It went very still. Instead, the stillness of someone absorbing information that is reorganizing everything they thought they understood about the past year, fitting new pieces into spaces where different pieces used to be, and finding with a sick and quiet horror that everything fits perfectly. When I finished with the financial documents, I paused. There is one more thing, I said. Show me, she said. I turned the laptop so she could read the email to Hillside Care and Recovery in San Bernardino. I watched her eyes move across the screen. I watched them stop at the phrase, patients who may initially resist placement. I watched her read it twice. Then Evelyn stood up from the table without a word and walked out of the kitchen. My heart lurched. I pushed back my chair, ready to follow her, ready to say whatever she needed to hear. But something in the set of her shoulders stopped me. Not grief, not collapse. Something more purposeful than either of those things. And I stayed where I was. She was gone for less than 2 minutes. When she came back, she was carrying a small blue box, the kind that department stores use for gifts. The lid slightly dented, tied with a piece of kitchen twine that had been knotted and re-knotted several times, as if she had opened and closed it more than once. She set it on the table between us, sat back down, and looked at it for a moment, with an expression I had never seen on her face before in 35 years. Then she looked at me. I need to show you something too, she said. Her voice was steady, steadier than mine would have been. I have been trying to decide for 3 weeks whether to tell you about this. I kept thinking I was overreacting. I kept telling myself it was nothing. She pressed her lips together hard. It was not nothing. She lifted the lid off the box. Inside was a stack of papers held together with a rubber band, perhaps 20 pages thick. Some were folded, some flat. Some had sticky note tabs along the edges in colors that Evelyn used for organizing recipes and household documents. She lifted the stack out and placed it on the table between us, then removed the rubber band carefully, the way you handle something you are not entirely sure of. Michael brought these to me, she said. Different occasions, different reasons. This one, she separated the top 3 pages and slid them toward me. He said was an updated beneficiary form for our homeowner's insurance policy. He said the insurance company had changed their paperwork requirements and I needed to re-sign. He sat right there. She pointed to the chair I was sitting in, and he watched me sign it, and then he put it in his briefcase and said he would mail it in. I looked at the document. It was not an insurance beneficiary form. It was a durable power of attorney granting Michael Hayes full legal authority to make financial decisions on behalf of Evelyn Margaret Hayes in the event that she was deemed unable to manage her own affairs. My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. At this one, Evelyn said, pulling out another page with hands that had begun to shake. He said was a bank form updating our emergency contact information. She set it down in front of me. It was an authorization form for Michael to act as an account manager on Evelyn's individual savings account. And this one. Another page. Her hands were shaking harder now, the paper trembling between her fingers. He said it was a routine update for the Homeowners Association records. It was a notarized statement certifying that Evelyn Hayes had agreed to a property management consultation with a signature line that referenced terms and conditions on a document I did not see in the box. Evelyn set the remaining papers down on the table. Her hands were trembling so badly that the stack slid sideways, and she pressed both palms flat on top of it to hold it still. And I watched her close her eyes for a moment and breathe 1 breath, 2 breaths, before she opened them again. I trusted him, she said. The words came out stripped of everything except the plain, terrible truth of them. He is my son. I trusted him completely. And he sat in this kitchen, and he handed me papers, and he watched me sign my name, and he thanked me, and he kissed my cheek when he left. A tear ran down her face, and she did not wipe it away. Then another. He kissed my cheek, Richard. I reached across the table and covered both her hands with mine. She turned her hands over immediately and gripped my fingers so hard it hurt. And I held on just as hard because the pain was real, and it was ours. And right now, that was something to hold on to. We are both his victims, she said. Her voice broke on the last word, cracked open right down the middle, and then she was crying. Not the heaving, gasping sobs from the hospital, but something quieter and deeper. The kind of crying that comes from a place below shock, from the place where love and betrayal have been sitting together for a long time, waiting to be acknowledged. I moved around the table and sat beside her, and put my arm around her shoulders, and she turned into me and pressed her face against my chest and cried with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has finally been given permission to set it down. I held her and did not tell her it was going to be all right, because I had promised her truth this morning, not comfort, and the two are not always the same thing. When the crying slowed, when her breathing evened out and her grip on my shirt loosened slightly, she pulled back enough to look at my face. Her eyes were red and swollen, her cheeks were wet, but her gaze when it met mine was clear and direct and carried something in it that had not been there before. Resolution. "What do we do now, Richard?" she asked. I looked at my wife, this woman who had built a life beside me for 35 years, who had signed papers in good faith that her son had used as weapons against her, who had just handed me the last piece of evidence we needed, and I felt something settle in my chest with the quiet, absolute certainty of a foundation that has been properly laid. "We fight back," I said, "together." I picked up my phone and called Diana Reeves. She answered on the first ring. "Diana," I said, "we have more than I told you last night. Evelyn has documents. Signed documents Michael obtained under false pretenses. Power of attorney account access authorization, at least one notarized statement. We need to be in your office this morning." Diana's voice came back immediately sharp and clear and ready. "I'll have coffee waiting. Be here by 9. Diana Reeves's office on the 18th floor of a building on South Figueroa Street had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the downtown Los Angeles skyline. And on a clear Monday morning in July, the view was the kind that reminded you the city was enormous and indifferent and did not particularly care about your problems. Diana herself was neither of those things. She was 52 with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of stillness that comes not from calm but from absolute focus. The stillness of someone who has heard a great many devastating things across a great many conference tables and has learned to receive them without flinching, because flinching does not help her clients. She had 2 coffee cups already waiting when we arrived, and she did not waste time on pleasantries. "Show me everything," she said. "Don't leave anything out." We spent 90 minutes going through it all. Frank's financial documentation, the camera footage from Margaret's security system, the HELOC application with the forged signature, the 3 shell accounts and the wire transfers to MH Pacific Holdings in Nevada, the emails to Victor Caldwell, the emails to Crestline Capital, and finally, the blue box. Evelyn setting it on Diana's conference table and removing the stack of documents Michael had obtained through deception one by one, explaining each one in a voice that started unsteady and grew firmer with every page. Diana listened to all of it without interrupting. When we finished, she sat back in her chair, pressed her fingertips together, and looked at us both. "I want to be very clear with you about what you have," she said, "because what you have is significant." She stood and moved to the whiteboard on the far wall, uncapping a marker. "First," she said, writing as she spoke, "California Penal Code. Section 368, Elder Financial Abuse. Richard qualifies as a protected elder under this statute. He is 67 years old, and California law defines an elder as any person 65 or older. The financial exploitation of a protected elder carries enhanced penalties in this state, including mandatory restitution and potential state prison time. Evelyn's case is covered separately under additional counts of forgery and fraud, which carry their own significant penalties." She underlined it. "2nd California Penal Code, Section 470. Forgery, the HELOC signature. The notarized documents Evelyn signed under false pretenses, every one of those is a separate count." She wrote the second number. "Third, and this is where it becomes a federal matter, 18 United States Code, Section 1343, wire fraud. The moment that $200,000 crossed state lines through the federal banking system, as part of a scheme to defraud, Michael exposed himself to federal prosecution. Maximum sentence 20 years per count. Evelyn's hand found mine under the conference table and gripped hard. I could feel her fingers trembling slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the particular physical release that comes when something you have been carrying alone finally gets named out loud by someone with the authority to do something about it. "What do we do first?" I asked. "The first," Diana said. "Capping the marker, I file an emergency ex parte injunction and asset freeze order with the Los Angeles Superior Court today. This is a temporary restraining order targeting your financial assets. Specifically, it prohibits Michael from selling, transferring, encumbering, or in any way altering your property or accounts while the order is in effect. It goes into effect within hours of filing, and any transaction he attempts in violation of it becomes immediately void and constitutes contempt of court." She looked at Evelyn directly, and her voice softened without losing any of its precision. "The documents you brought me today, the power of attorney, the account authorization, I am simultaneously filing to have those voided on the grounds of fraud and undue influence. They are not legally binding because they were obtained through deception. Evelyn, you did not sign away anything that will hold." Evelyn exhaled a long, shaking breath that had been held for a very long time. She pressed her free hand flat against the conference table and closed her eyes for just a moment. And when she opened them again, there was something in her face that had not been there when we walked in. Not relief exactly. Something steadier than relief. The look of a person who has just been handed solid ground after days of standing on ice. "I am also contacting Victor Caldwell directly," Diana continued, turning back to her notes. "He needs to understand that any transaction he facilitates involving your property will expose him to civil liability and potential criminal charges as a knowing participant in a fraudulent scheme. My experience is that brokers cooperate quickly when that conversation happens." She was right about that. Caldwell called Diana's office before noon, nervous and cooperative, his voice carrying the breathless quality of a man who has just realized the deal he thought was simply unconventional was actually something considerably worse. He provided every text message and email he had exchanged with Michael without being asked twice. When Diana relayed this to me afterward, she described him as someone who had been standing too close to a fire without realizing it was there, relieved to step back and very willing to help locate the source. I sat in the leather chair across from Diana's desk and tried to organize what I was feeling. There was relief. Yes, the specific relief of watching someone competent take hold of a situation that had been spinning beyond my reach for 9 days. But underneath it was something else. Something I had been keeping at a careful distance since the night I sat alone in my office reading Michael's emails. Grief, not for what had happened, for what it meant about who my son had become, or perhaps who he had always been, underneath the surface I had spent 38 years choosing to trust. Diana must have read something in my face because she paused before continuing and looked at me directly. "Richard," she said, "I need you to understand something. What we are doing today is not aggressive. It is not vindictive. It is protective. Every step we take from here is designed to put a legal wall between Michael and your assets and between Michael and Evelyn before he can do any more damage. That is all this is." "I understand," I said. "Good," she said. "Because the next few weeks are going to require you to be steady, not cold, not angry, steady. Can you do that?" I thought about the brick wall on Marengo Avenue, the one I had built in the summer of 1987, with my own hands in the heat, one course at a time, because I knew that anything worth building required patience more than strength. "Yes," I said, "I can do that." Diana nodded once and picked up her phone. 40 minutes later, the emergency ex parte injunction and asset freeze order had been filed with the Los Angeles Superior Court. Victor Caldwell had been contacted and was cooperating fully. The power of attorney and account authorization Evelyn had unknowingly signed were formally flagged for voiding on grounds of fraud. We were standing to leave when Diana's phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at it. Her expression did not change exactly, but something in it sharpened the way a surgeon's focus sharpens when something unexpected appears on the table. "Michael just filed a conservatorship petition with the court," she said, setting the phone down. "He is asking a judge to declare you mentally incompetent, Richard, and transfer control of your assets to himself. The air went out of the room entirely. Evelyn's grip on my arm tightened. I could feel the bones in her hand through her sleeve. I looked at Diana. "Can he do that?" "He just did," she said. And then she held up her phone so I could see the screen, the EPO filing confirmation that had arrived 30 seconds before Michael's petition. "But so did I." She looked at me with the quiet, absolute confidence of someone who has spent 25 years preparing for exactly this kind of moment. And mine got there first. Diana called me on Thursday morning at 8:47 with the particular tone in her voice that I had already learned to recognize in the short time I had known her. Not excitement, because Diana Reeves did not do excitement, but a sharpened precision the way a scalpel is precise that told me she had found something. "I need you to come in," she said. "I found something about Michael's attorney that you are going to want to hear in person." I was at her office by 9:30. Diana was standing at her desk when I arrived. Her laptop opened a printed document beside it that she had already highlighted in 3 places. She turned the laptop to face me without preamble. "Michael's legal representation on the conservatorship petition is listed as Gregory Paulson Esquire," she said. "I ran his name through the California State Bar attorney search this morning. The State Bar maintains a public database of every licensed attorney in California, their status, their disciplinary history, everything. Anyone can look it up." She tapped the screen. "Gregory Paulson's license status is listed as disbarred, effective November 14, 2019. Reason: misappropriation of client funds and fraudulent billing practices." I stared at the screen. "He has been practicing law illegally for nearly 6 years, Diana said. "He cannot represent a client in any California court. He cannot file petitions, appear at hearings, or sign legal documents on a client's behalf. Everything he has filed on Michael's behalf in connection with the conservatorship petition is procedurally compromised." She picked up the printed document, her own filing to the State Bar already completed. "I submitted this report 40 minutes ago. The State Bar will investigate and notify the court. The conservatorship petition is not dead yet. Michael can retain legitimate counsel, but the damage to his credibility before the judge is significant and immediate." I sat down in the chair across from her desk and pressed my hands against my knees. "He hired a disbarred lawyer," I said. "Not a question. Just the fact of it sitting in the air between us, small and ugly and clarifying." "He hired someone who would work cheaply, ask no questions, and move fast," Diana said. "Which tells us something important about where Michael is right now. He is not operating from a position of strength, Richard. He is operating from desperation. Desperate people make shortcuts. Shortcuts leave evidence." She closed the laptop. "We have his evidence." My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A text from Sandra. "He is not sleeping, making calls until 2, 3 in the morning. I have never seen him like this. I think he knows it is falling apart." I showed the message to Diana without comment. She read it, nodded once, and said nothing further about it. Then her desk phone rang. She answered, listened for approximately 30 seconds, and looked up at me with an expression that carried something new in it. Not surprised, because Diana did not surprise easily, but the particular satisfaction of a plan arriving at exactly the moment it was supposed to. "That was Detective Ochoa," she said, setting the phone down. "He wants to meet with us this afternoon. He says he has been conducting his own independent review of the case and has reached some conclusions he would like to share." I felt something lift slightly in my chest. He changed his mind about me. "He followed the evidence," Diana said, "which is what good detectives do." She straightened the papers on her desk with efficient, practiced hands. "He reviewed Margaret's camera footage independently. He spoke with Gloria Barnes at Cedars-Sinai. 2 sources, neither of which came from us, told him the same story your evidence tells." She looked at me directly. "Ochoa is not coming to us as an adversary anymore, Richard. He is coming as an ally." That afternoon, the 3 of us sat in Diana's conference room, Richard, Diana, and Detective Ray Ochoa, who looked considerably less like the man who had put handcuffs on me 12 days ago, and considerably more like someone who had spent those 12 days arriving at a conclusion that cost him something to reach. He set a folder on the table without being asked. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Hayes," he said. His voice was even and direct, the way apologies sound when they come from people who mean them. "I followed the initial evidence where it pointed. The initial evidence pointed at you. I was wrong, and I am sorry." My throat tightened unexpectedly. I had not anticipated that those words from that particular source would hit me as hard as they did. 40 years of building things. 40 years of doing honest work and living an honest life. Having someone who had put handcuffs on me sit across a table and say, "I was wrong and I am sorry." The relief of it was physical, a loosening in my chest that I had not realized was still clenched. "Thank you, detective," I said. "I appreciate that more than you know." Ochoa nodded, opened his folder, and got to work. He had been coordinating quietly with the FBI field office in Los Angeles regarding the wire fraud component of the case. The federal angle, the shell accounts, the interstate wire transfers, MH Pacific Holdings in Nevada fell squarely within federal jurisdiction, and the FBI had opened a preliminary inquiry 3 days ago, based on the financial documentation Diana had shared through proper legal channels. "We are coordinating on timing," Ochoa said. "When we move, we want to move on everything at once. No warnings, no opportunity to destroy evidence or board a flight." He looked at Diana. "How close are you?" "Close," Diana said. "There is one more thing I want in place first." She looked at me. "The family meeting," she said. "Michael is going to call one. Men like Michael always call a family meeting when they feel the ground shifting. They need an audience, they need to control the narrative, they need to believe they can still talk their way out." She leaned forward slightly. "Let him have his meeting, Richard. Let him stand in that living room and give his speech. And then let us show him what we have been building while he was talking." I thought about the brick wall on Marengo Avenue, the one I had built in 1987, still standing. "All right," I said, "let him come. Before I take you into that living room, before Richard walks through that door, and everything Michael has built comes crashing down, drop the number 67 in the comments right now. One for every year this man has carried himself with dignity. Let him know you are still standing with him. And note some elements of this story are fictional, included for educational and entertainment value. If this kind of content is not right for you, it is perfectly fine to find something else. No hard feelings at all." Michael sent the invitation by text message on Friday afternoon, a group message to 14 people, family and longtime friends, asking everyone to come to the house on Marengo Avenue that Sunday at 2 o'clock for what he called an important family conversation about Mom and Dad's well-being. I read the message standing in Diana's office. She read it over my shoulder and said without any particular inflection, "There it is." "We spent Saturday preparing," Diana briefed Ochoa. Ochoa coordinated with FBI Special Agent Thomas Brewer from the Los Angeles field office, a compact, methodical man in his late 40s who spoke in short sentences and carried himself with the particular stillness of someone who had executed enough of these situations to find them routine. Brewer confirmed that the grand jury subpoena was ready for service. Ochoa confirmed he would be present as a state observer. Diana confirmed that the box of evidence was ready. I confirmed that I knew how to set a table. On Sunday afternoon, Evelyn and I opened the front door of our home and welcomed people inside Margaret from across the street. Our neighbors, the Delgados, from 2 doors down, Evelyn's sister Patricia, who had driven up from San Diego, 3 cousins on my side, who I had not seen since Christmas, and Pastor James Whitfield, who arrived early, pressed my hand between both of his without saying anything, and took a seat in the corner of the living room, where he could see everything. Michael arrived last at 2:15, with Sandra a half step behind him. He was wearing a pressed blue shirt, and he had gotten a haircut since I last saw him. He looked prepared. He looked in the careful surface way that very frightened people sometimes manage to look completely in control. He did not see Ochoa immediately. Ochoa was seated in the far corner of the room, behind 2 of Evelyn's cousins, his jacket off, looking for all the world, like someone's quiet uncle who had arrived early and found a comfortable chair. Agent Brewer was standing near the kitchen doorway holding a glass of water, indistinguishable from any other guest unless you knew what you were looking for. I had put the box on the bookshelf before anyone arrived. Nobody had asked about it. Michael moved through the room, greeting people, clasping hands, touching shoulders, and I watched him work the space with the focused efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this. He hugged Evelyn's sister. He told my cousin Gerald that he looked great. He was warm and present and entirely convincing, and watching him perform it, I felt the old familiar ache, not anger, not anymore, but grief for the person he might have been if something in him had been assembled differently. At 2:25, he moved to the center of the room and cleared his throat. The room settled. "I want to thank everyone for coming," Michael said. His voice was warm and measured, pitched perfectly for the room. "I know this is unusual. I know it feels strange to be gathered like this. But I love my parents, and over the past several months I have become genuinely concerned about their well-being, and I felt that the people who care most about them deserve to know what I have been observing." He paused. Several people nodded. "My father is 67 years old," he continued. "He is a proud man, a strong man, and I think that pride has made it difficult for him to acknowledge that he is struggling. I have watched him become confused, become angry in ways that frighten my mother, make decisions that don't reflect the man I grew up admiring." His voice thickened with practiced emotion. "I am not here to embarrass him. I am here because I love him and because I believe he needs more support than our family has been providing." I sat in the armchair nearest the bookshelf and said nothing. Pastor Whitfield's hand rested gently on the armrest beside mine, not touching, just present. Michael was building towards something. I could feel the architecture of it, the careful escalation of concern and love and reluctant duty, and he was very good at it. 3 of my cousins were leaning forward. Evelyn's sister Patricia had pressed her hand to her mouth. Then Michael made the mistake of pausing for effect, and in that pause Detective Ochoa stood up. He did not announce himself. He did not raise his voice. He simply rose from the chair in the corner with the unhurried authority of a man who does not need to perform authority, because he actually possesses it. And he walked to the center of the room and stood beside Michael with an expression of professional neutrality that made the air in the room change temperature. Michael turned, saw Ochoa. His mouth opened slightly, just slightly, and the warm, practiced quality in his face flickered, the way a candle flickers when a door opens somewhere in a house. Agent Brewer set his water glass down on the kitchen counter and moved forward. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a white envelope sealed and official, with Michael's full name typed on the front. He held it out. "Michael Robert Hayes," Brewer said in the flat, quiet voice of someone delivering a fact rather than a threat. "This is a federal grand jury subpoena requiring your testimony before a United States federal grand jury regarding allegations of wire fraud, forgery, and financial elder abuse. You are required by law to comply." Michael did not take the envelope immediately. For 3 full seconds, he stood in the center of his parents' living room, in front of 14 people who had come because he had invited them, holding the ruins of the narrative he had spent 6 months constructing. And I watched something happen behind his eyes that I had never seen there before in 38 years. He was afraid. Not performing fear, not manufacturing it for an audience. Actually genuinely afraid, the fear of a man who has run a very long way and has just realized the road has ended. He took the envelope. Pastor Whitfield leaned close to me and said very quietly, "Richard, the box." I stood up, walked to the bookshelf, picked up the box, and carried it to the table. I set the box on the dining table in the center of the room. It made a sound when it landed, not loud, just the quiet, solid thud of something, with weight being placed with intention, and that sound did what no words had done yet. It stopped the room completely. 14 people looked at the box. Michael looked at the box. And in the half-second before I opened it, I saw something move across my son's face that confirmed everything I had spent 15 days proving. He knew what was inside. I lifted the lid and began. I did not raise my voice. I did not perform. After 40 years of presenting structural assessments to city engineers, insurance adjusters, and building inspection boards, I knew that the most devastating thing you can do with evidence is simply show it clearly and let it speak for itself. I placed the first item on the table, a printed still from Margaret's security camera, timestamp, 11:32 p.m. showing Michael leaving this house carrying a bag that belonged to Evelyn. I laid it flat so everyone in the room could see it. "This is my son," I said, "leaving our home on the night my wife was injured, at 11:32 in the evening, the same night Michael told the police he had come to check on his mother out of concern for her safety." Nobody spoke. Cousin Gerald, who had been nodding along with Michael's speech 20 minutes earlier, stopped nodding. I placed the second item, Frank's documentation of the HELOC, $200,000 borrowed against our home using a signature that was not mine, processed through a notary public who authenticated a document they never witnessed. "This is a loan taken out against this house," I said. "In my name, using my signature. I did not sign it. I did not authorize it. I did not know it existed until 11 days ago." Michael's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth. "I am not finished," I said. I did not look at him when I said it. I kept my eyes on the table and placed the third item, the email to Hillside Care and Recovery in San Bernardino, Printed in full, the phrase patients who may initially resist placement visible from 6 feet away. The sound Patricia made when she read it, Evelyn's sister who had driven 3 hours from San Diego to be here today, was the sound of someone who has just understood something they cannot ununderstand. A short, sharp intake of breath, followed by a hand pressed hard over her mouth. I placed the fourth item, the debt records. $461,000 owed to Crestline Capital Solutions in Nevada. The deadline noticed the escalating language of a private lender, running out of patience. "This is why," I said simply. "This is the reason for all of it." I placed the fifth item, the text exchanges with Victor Caldwell. Off-market, cash only. 1.7 million. No title search. And then I reached into the box and took out the last item, the small blue box within the box. The one Evelyn had carried out of our bedroom 6 days ago. I placed it on the table and looked at my wife. Evelyn stood up. She had not said a word since the meeting began. She had sat in the chair beside mine, with her hands folded in her lap, and her back straight, and her face composed with the specific, deliberate composure of a woman who has decided that this is the moment she has been gathering herself for, and she was going to meet it standing up. She opened the blue box herself. She removed the stack of papers, the durable power of attorney, the account authorization, the notarized property statement, and she laid them on the table one by one beside everything else I had placed there. And she did it slowly, without rushing, the way you do something, when you want every person in the room to understand exactly what they are looking at. Then she looked at Michael. Her eyes were dry. Her voice, when it came, did not shake. "You sat in this kitchen," she said. "You sat in the chair your father is sitting in right now. You put papers in front of me, and you told me they were insurance forms and bank updates and routine paperwork, and I signed them because you are my son, and I have trusted you every day of your life." She paused. Her chin lifted slightly. "You kissed my cheek when you left." Michael's face had gone the color of old concrete gray, and still and without expression, the face of a man watching a structure he built come down piece by piece, and understanding that there is nothing left to do but watch. "Michael," he started. "Mom, I was trying to—" "Do not," Evelyn said. The two words landed like a closing door. "Do not tell me what you were trying to do. I have read what you were trying to do. I have seen the email you sent to the facility in San Bernardino. I know what patients who may initially resist placement means, Michael. I am 64 years old, not 6. I know exactly what it means." The room was so quiet I could hear the oak tree in the front yard moving in the July wind outside the window. Sandra was sitting in a chair near the kitchen doorway. She had not looked at Michael since Ochoa stood up. She was looking at her hands in her lap, and the expression on her face was not grief exactly. It was something more like the exhausted, clear-eyed recognition of someone who has finally stopped pretending that what they are looking at is something other than what it is. Michael turned to the room, to the cousins, to Patricia, to the neighbors, to anyone who might still be persuadable, and his voice cracked open with the desperate, ragged energy of a man throwing his last card. "I made mistakes," he said. "I know I made mistakes, but I love this family. I was scared of losing them, and I made mistakes, and I am asking everyone here to understand that I never wanted a mistake. I said, happens in a moment." Michael stopped. I looked at my son for the first time since I had opened the box. I looked at him directly, without anger, without performance, with the full weight of 38 years of loving him behind my eyes. "You spent 6 months building this," I said. "You built it carefully. You built it in layers. You built it the way I taught you to build things, with planning, with attention to detail, with patience." My voice did not break. "I would not let it break here. That is not a mistake, Michael. That is a choice. You made it every single day for 6 months, and now you are going to live with it." The room held that. Then Evelyn straightened to her full height, looked at her son one final time, and said 4 words in a voice that carried every year of her life in it. "Get out of my house." Michael looked at his mother. He looked at the table covered in evidence. He looked at Ochoa in the corner. And then, without another word, Michael Hayes picked up the grand jury subpoena from where he had set it on the side table, walked across the living room, opened the front door of the house he had been trying to steal, and walked out of it. The door closed behind him. Sandra did not follow him. She sat in her chair near the kitchen doorway, with her hands still in her lap, and when Patricia reached over and placed a hand on her arm, Sandra closed her eyes and let out a breath so long and so deep that it seemed to carry something out of her that had been living there uninvited for a very long time. Pastor Whitfield bowed his head. Evelyn sat back down beside me. She reached for my hand under the table, the same way she had reached for it in Diana's conference room, the same way she had reached for it in the hospital, the same way she had reached for it 10,000 times across 35 years. I held on. The Stanley Moss Courthouse on West Temple Street in downtown Los Angeles is one of those buildings that does not try to impress you and impresses you anyway. 12 stories of mid-century concrete, worn smooth in the lobbies by decades of foot traffic smelling of old paper and industrial floor cleaner, and the particular institutional gravity of a place where consequential things happen every day to ordinary people who never expected to be there. I had been inside courthouses before. Building permits, zoning disputes, the occasional contract arbitration that comes with 4 decades in the construction industry. I had never been inside one, wearing the particular weight I carried through the security checkpoint on that Friday morning in late July. The weight of a man who has spent 20 days proving that he is exactly who he has always been. Evelyn walked beside me through the lobby with her hand through my arm, her chin level, her back straight. She had worn the blue dress she bought for our 33rd anniversary dinner, and when I told her that morning, she looked beautiful. She had looked at me with steady eyes and said, "Good. I want to look like someone who cannot be intimidated." I had not been able to find a single word to add to that. Diana was waiting for us outside the courtroom on the 4th floor, a leather portfolio under her arm, and the expression of a woman who is prepared for every contingency and is now simply ready. "How are you both?" she asked. "Ready?" Evelyn said before I could answer. Diana smiled briefly warmly and pushed open the courtroom door. The hearing was formal and procedurally precise in the way that California probate court proceedings tend to be. Michael was present with his newly retained attorney, a man named Garrett who wore an expensive suit and had clearly been briefed under significant time pressure because his arguments, while technically competent, had the slightly breathless quality of someone who has been handed a losing hand and is doing their best to play it. The presiding judge was the Honorable Catherine Marsh, 60, silver-haired with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the expression of someone who has heard every variety of family dispute that exists and retains the capacity to be genuinely interested in none of them until the evidence gives her reason to be. She gave the evidence reason to be. Diana presented our case in 3 parts. First, the independent psychiatric evaluation conducted 48 hours earlier by Dr. Paulette Simmons, a board-certified neuropsychiatrist appointed by the court itself, whose report concluded without qualification that Richard James Hayes demonstrated full cognitive capacity, sound judgment, intact memory function, and no indicators of any condition that would impair his ability to manage his personal or financial affairs. Judge Marsh read the report twice. She asked Dr. Simmons 2 questions. Dr. Simmons answered both without hesitation. Second, Diana presented the counter evidence, the camera footage, the forged HELOC, the shell accounts, the email to Hillside, Care and Recovery, the documents Evelyn had signed under false pretenses. She did not editorialize. She simply placed each item into the record with its relevant documentation and let the judge read. I watched Judge Marsh's expression as she read the Hillside email. The phrase "patients who may initially resist placement" landed on her face the way it had landed on Patricia's face in our living room, a small, visible tightening around the eyes that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow, but was the thing that exists between them. Third and finally, Diana presented the California State Bar disbarment record of Gregory Paulson Michael's original attorney alongside the State Bar's confirmation that a formal complaint had been filed. Garrett objected to the relevance of the disbarment record. Judge Marsh overruled him without looking up from the document she was reading. The hearing lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. When Judge Marsh was ready to rule, she removed her reading glasses, set them on the bench in front of her, and looked at Michael directly for the first time since the proceeding had begun. The petition for conservatorship of the person and estate of Richard James Hayes, she said in the clear, unhurried voice of someone delivering a verdict they are entirely confident in, is denied. The evidence presented before this court does not support a finding of incapacity. To the contrary, the evidence suggests a pattern of conduct by the petitioner that this court finds deeply concerning and will be noting in the official record. She brought her gavel down once. The sound of it moved through my chest like a bell being struck. Evelyn's grip on my arm tightened so hard it hurt, and I covered her hand with mine and held it there and let the sound of that gavel settle into me, the way good news settles when you have been carrying bad news for long enough. Not all at once, but slowly in layers, the way warmth comes back into cold hands. Michael and Garrett left the courtroom without speaking to us. I watched them go. Michael with his shoulders forward and his eyes down, the posture of a man who has run out of angles, and I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something quieter and more complicated, a bone-deep tiredness mixed with the first real breath of relief I had drawn in 20 days. Outside in the fourth-floor corridor, Diana shook my hand, and then, in what I believe was a departure from her professional standard, Practice shook Evelyn's hand and held it for a moment. "You were remarkable in there," Diana said to Evelyn. "Both of you." Ochoa was waiting near the elevator. He nodded at me a single wordless nod that carried everything it needed to carry and fell into step beside us as we walked toward the exit. 2 days, he said quietly. Maybe 3, then we move. I nodded. We stepped out of the Stanley Moss courthouse into the July afternoon, and the Los Angeles sun hit us full and warm and indifferent, the way the sun always is, knowing nothing about what has just happened inside the building and caring less. Evelyn tilted her face up toward it anyway. My phone buzzed, a text from Sandra. "They're coming for him tomorrow morning. I thought you should know. I'm sorry for everything, Mr. Hayes. I truly am." I read it twice. Then I put the phone in my pocket and took Evelyn's hand, and we walked together toward the parking structure on the far side of Temple Street. I was in the backyard when Ochoa called. Not doing anything in particular, just standing near the oak tree with a cup of coffee that had gone cold looking at the section of front walkway I had repaired last spring. The new concrete still slightly lighter in color than the old concrete around it. The kind of thing you only notice when you are standing still long enough to look. I had been standing still for about 40 minutes, which told me something about the state I was in, on that Tuesday morning, while my son was being arrested 22 miles away in Century City. Ochoa called at 10:14 a.m. "It's done," he said. I sat down on the back porch steps without meaning to. My legs simply made the decision for me, the way legs sometimes do when they have been holding up more than their share for longer than is reasonable. "Tell me," I said. Ochoa told me. The arrest team had gone in at 9:50 a.m., 4 officers, Ochoa and Agent Brewer, with the arrest warrant signed by a federal magistrate judge the previous afternoon. Michael's office was on the 22nd floor of a glass tower on Avenue of the Stars in Century City, the kind of address designed to project success, to signal to anyone who visited that the person behind the desk was a man of substance and reliability. The receptionist had called back to Michael's office. Michael had come out to the lobby himself, which told Ochoa that he had not yet understood what was happening, or had understood, and was attempting to appear as though he had not. He understood when he saw Brewer. The color left his face. Ochoa said, "The way color leaves a face when something the body has been dreading finally arrives and the body recognizes it before the mind has fully caught up." Michael had stood in the lobby of his 22nd floor office with its view of the Los Angeles basin and its carefully cultivated atmosphere of professional success. And he had looked at the arrest warrant in Brewer's hand, and every constructed thing about him, the pressed shirt, the confident posture, the performance of a man in control, had come apart at once quietly, like a building whose load-bearing structure has finally given way. Brewer had read him his rights in a clear, unhurried voice. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you." Michael had listened without speaking. The charges were read: elder financial abuse under California Penal Code, Section 368. Forgery under California, Penal Code Section 470. Wire fraud under 18. United States Code, Section 1343. And then Ochoa paused in his account, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something in it that I had not heard from him before, a careful, measured quality, as if he was trying to hand me something fragile without dropping it. "Sandra was there," he said. I closed my eyes. Michael had called her that morning and asked her to bring his passport to the office, Ochoa said. He told her he needed it for a notarization. A pause. What Michael did not know was that Sandra had already contacted us 2 days earlier. After the family meeting, she called the FBI tip line. She told Agent Brewer she believed Michael was preparing to flee. So, When Michael called her that morning about the passport, she did not panic. She called Brewer first. He told her to go act normal, bring the passport, keep him calm, and in that office until we arrived. She did exactly that. Another pause. She was standing in the lobby when we came in. She knew what was about to happen, Richard. She made sure he stayed put. Michael had been planning to run. Agent Brewer had found one-way airline searches in Michael's browsing history 2 days earlier, flights to destinations without extradition, treaties with the United States. The passport was the last piece he needed. He had intended to finalize whatever he could and disappear before anyone realized what had happened. Sandra had known that, and she had made sure he never got the chance. What did she do? I asked. When they put the handcuffs on. Ochoa was quiet for a moment. She watched, he said. Michael looked at her when they turned him around. He looked at her the way Ochoa stopped, started again. He looked at her like he was expecting something from her, like there was still something she could do. Another pause. She picked up her purse. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She did not look back at him. The coffee cup in my hand had long since gone completely cold. I set it down on the porch step beside me. I thought about Sandra sitting in the corner of our living room on Sunday afternoon, watching her hands in her lap, while Michael's speech dissolved around him. I thought about the text message she had sent me last night. I'm sorry for everything, Mr. Hayes. I truly am. I thought about a woman who had spent years next to a man she loved, watching him become someone she did not recognize, making herself smaller and quieter and more invisible in the hope that things would turn around. And then when the moment came, choosing to do the one thing that mattered. She had not simply walked away from him, she had walked toward us. That is a different thing entirely, and I did not want to forget it. When the handcuffs went on, she did not look back at him. Not because she could not, because she had already made her choice 3 days earlier, standing in a lobby with a passport in her hand and a phone call to the FBI behind her. I understood that completely. Evelyn appeared at the back door. She looked at me sitting on the porch steps, and she knew she always knew the way she has always known the way. 35 years of genuine attention to another person produces a kind of knowledge that has nothing to do with words. She came out and sat down beside me on the step, her shoulder pressed against mine. It's done, I said. She nodded. Her hand found mine between us on the step and held on. We sat there together in the backyard of the home we had built under the oak tree. I had planted the spring we moved in the July morning heat, and neither of us said anything for a while because there was nothing that needed to be said. Michael was gone. Not the way we had feared he would go, vanished to somewhere unreachable. The money gone. Evelyn placed in a facility 3 counties away. The house sold to a stranger. Gone the right way. Gone the only way that allowed the rest of us to stay. After a while, Evelyn said, "Is it over?" I looked at the oak tree. I looked at the repaired walkway. I looked at the brick wall along the front of the property, warm and amber, even from back here, still standing exactly as I had built it 37 years ago. Almost, I said. There's one more day we need to get through together. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I put my arm around her and held on. November came to Los Angeles the way it always does not, with the dramatic seasonal shift that the rest of the country experiences, but quietly, gradually, a slight softening of the heat and a change in the quality of the light that you notice more in how it feels than in what the thermometer says. The jacaranda trees had dropped their purple flowers months ago. The mornings had a new coolness to them that made the coffee taste better, and the walk from the parking structure to the courthouse feel like something a person could sustain. I had driven this route 4 times in 4 months' arraignment preliminary hearing, 2 pretrial conferences. I knew which level of the parking structure had the most reliable elevator. I knew which security checkpoint moved fastest in the morning. I knew the coffee cart on the ground floor lobby closed at 9:45, and that if you arrived after that, you were drinking the vending machine option from the 3rd floor, which was not worth discussing. Evelyn and I arrived at 8:30. Diana was already there, standing outside Department 47 on the 6th floor with her portfolio, and the expression she wore when she had done everything that could be done and was now waiting for the process to complete itself. She greeted us with a nod and a brief warm press of her hand on Evelyn's arm, and then we went inside and we sat down and we waited. Michael entered with his attorney at 8:52. I had not seen my son in 4 months. The distance had changed something in the way I looked at him, not softened it exactly, but clarified it. The way stepping back from a structure you have been standing too close to allows you to see its actual shape. He was thinner than he had been in July. His suit was the same expensive navy blue, but it hung differently on him now, as if the person inside it had contracted slightly. He did not look at us when he came in. Sandra was not present. I had not expected her to be. The proceedings moved with the efficient, impersonal rhythm of a system that processes grief and consequence and human failure every single day, and has developed the necessary mechanisms for doing so without stopping. Judge Marsh presided, the same Judge Marsh from the conservatorship hearing, whose expression remained as measured and precise as it had been in July, except that today there was no ambiguity for it to navigate. Michael's attorney stood and confirmed that his client had agreed to enter a guilty plea on all 3 counts. Elder financial abuse under California Penal Code. Section 368 forgery under California Penal Code. Section 470, and wire fraud under 18. United States Code Section 1343. The state and federal charges had been consolidated under a coordinated plea agreement, allowing all counts to be resolved in a single proceeding before Judge Marsh. Judge Marsh looked at Michael directly. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "do you understand that by entering this plea, you are waiving your right to a trial by jury, your right to confront the witnesses against you, and your right against self-incrimination?" Michael's voice, when it came, was the quietest I had ever heard it. "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you enter this plea freely and voluntarily without coercion or promise of leniency beyond the terms of your plea agreement?" "Yes, Your Honor." "How do you plead?" A pause. 3 seconds, maybe 4. The kind of pause that contains the weight of every decision that led to this room, every shortcut taken, every calculation made, every night spent on a phone in a locked office while the people who loved him slept down the hallway unaware. "Guilty," Michael said. Judge Marsh sentenced him, in accordance with the plea agreement, 8 years in California. State prison mandatory restitution of $200,000 to Richard and Evelyn Hayes, and a permanent no-contact order prohibiting Michael from approaching, contacting, or communicating with either of his parents following his release. She brought the gavel down. Michael's remaining personal assets were subsequently seized and liquidated to satisfy his outstanding debts, including the balance owed to his private lenders in Nevada. The sound of it was different from the sound in October. Less like a bell and more like a door, closing final and definitive and quiet in the way that only truly final things can be quiet. The court officers moved toward Michael. He stood. He extended his wrists. He allowed the handcuffs to be applied with a compliance that was more devastating to witness than resistance would have been, because compliance meant he understood completely and had run out of anything else. And then he turned. He turned toward the gallery, toward the row where Evelyn and I were sitting, and he looked at me specifically with the directness of someone who has decided that, if this is the last moment, it should at least be an honest one. I have thought about what I saw in his face in that moment many times since November. I have tried to name it accurately the way I try to name things accurately, because accuracy matters to me, and always has. It was not remorse exactly, though there may have been remorse somewhere beneath it. It was not a plea for forgiveness, though perhaps that was there too. What I saw, I think, was recognition. The recognition of a man seeing clearly and without the buffer of self-deception. What he had actually done, not the version he had constructed to make it manageable, not the story he had told himself about necessity and desperation and difficult choices, but the actual thing itself, seen plainly in a room where there was no longer any story left to tell. I did not look away. I looked back at my son, this man I had held in a hospital room 38 years ago, this person I had taught to read a level and drive a nail straight and understand why foundations matter. And I held his gaze and I let him see whatever was in my face, which was not anger and was not triumph and was not forgiveness either, not yet, maybe not ever, but was something true and something permanent and something that had been there since the night he was born and would be there until I was not. The court officers turned him around. He walked out of the courtroom. Evelyn's hand found mine between us on the bench and held on so tightly that my knuckles ached, and I was grateful for it. The same way I had been grateful for the pain of the handcuffs 4 months ago, because it was real, and it was ours, and real things matter, when everything else has been constructed and performed and designed to deceive. Outside in the 6th floor corridor, Pastor Whitfield was waiting on the bench beside the elevator. He had not come inside for the sentencing he had offered, and I had told him he did not need to, and he had understood what I meant by that, without my having to explain it. He stood when he saw us coming. He looked at my face, and then he put both hands on my shoulders, and he said simply and without embellishment, "It's done, Richard. It's finally done." My throat tightened in a way I had not anticipated and could not entirely control, and I pressed my lips together hard and nodded, and Whitfield pulled me into a brief, firm embrace of the kind that men of his generation give when words have reached their limit. Diana shook our hands in the corridor. Ochoa was at the far end of the hallway, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and when he caught my eye, he gave me the same single nod he had given me outside the courtroom in October. The nod that said everything it needed to say without saying anything at all. We took the elevator down to the lobby. We walked out of the Stanley Moss courthouse into the November afternoon. The sun was lower than it had been in July, the light coming in at an angle that made the city look different, older, maybe, or just more honest. The way things look when the harsh overhead light of summer has softened into something that shows texture instead of washing it out. Evelyn stopped on the courthouse steps and turned her face up toward that light. I stood beside her and did the same. After a moment, she said, "Where do we go from here, Richard?" I had been thinking about that question for 4 months. I had been thinking about it since the night in my office with the laptop screen and the email from Hillside Care and Recovery. I had been thinking about it since the morning I sat in the car on Marengo Avenue looking at the brick wall I had built in 1987. "Somewhere with a view of the water," I said. Evelyn turned and looked at me. Then she smiled, the real one, the one that reaches her eyes, the one I had not seen in a very long time. "Santa Barbara," she said. "Santa Barbara," I said. We walked down the courthouse steps together into the November afternoon, and the city spread out around us in every direction, enormous and indifferent and full, as it always is, of people carrying things that other people cannot see. The Pacific Ocean does not care about your story. I mean that as a comfort, not a criticism. After 5 months of living inside a story that felt like it was consuming everything, the evidence, the hearings, the depositions, the long nights reading emails that were never meant for my eyes, the longer nights trying to sleep while the weight of all of it pressed down on the ceiling of whatever room I happened to be lying in, there is something genuinely restorative about sitting on a balcony in December in Santa Barbara and looking out at water that has been doing exactly what it is doing right now for longer than human beings have had words for anything. The water does not know about Michael. It does not know about the HELOC or the shell accounts or the grand jury subpoena or the 8 years in California State Prison. It does not know about Evelyn's blue box or the email to Hillside Care and Recovery or the 4 words she said in our living room in July that still ring in my chest sometimes when I am very quiet. It just moves. It just keeps moving. And on a clear December morning in Santa Barbara, sitting in a wooden chair on the balcony of the small house we had rented, while we looked for something to buy with a cup of coffee that was actually still warm and Evelyn's voice coming through the kitchen window as she talked on the phone with her sister Patricia, I found that watching it move was exactly what I needed. We had sold the house on Marengo Avenue in October. It had not been a difficult decision in the end. I had expected it to be. I had expected to stand in the driveway one last time and feel the full weight of 37 years pressing down on me. The brick wall, the oak tree, the repaired walkway, the kitchen where Michael had sat and handed Evelyn papers and watched her sign them and kissed her cheek when he left. I had expected grief, the complicated layered kind that attaches itself to places the way it attaches itself to people. What I felt instead, standing in the driveway on the morning the sale closed, was something closer to release. Not because the memories were gone. They were not gone, and they would not go. The memory of teaching Michael to lay brick was still there. The memory of Evelyn slow dancing in the kitchen on a Tuesday night was still there. The memory of 37 Christmases and 37 summers and the particular sound the front door made when it closed in a certain kind of wind, all of it still there, carried with me the way you carry the things that have genuinely mattered. But the house itself had become something else. It had become the place where I had been handcuffed on my own front porch, the place where a document with my forged signature had been prepared, the place where my wife had hidden a blue box under the bed and spent 3 weeks deciding whether to tell me what was inside it. Some places hold too much of the wrong kind of weight. You do not abandon them. You simply recognize that you have carried what was worth carrying and that the structure itself no longer serves the life you are trying to live. Frank and Margaret had come to help us pack. Frank had carried boxes with the focused efficiency of a man who approaches every task as a logistical problem to be solved, and Margaret had wrapped Evelyn's good china in newspaper with the careful, unhurried hands of someone who understands that some things deserve time. Pastor Whitfield had stood in the living room doorway on the last day and read a short passage from the Book of Psalms, not a sad one about going out with joy, and the four of us had stood there in the empty room that still smelled like our life. And we had let the words settle around us, and then we had carried the last boxes out to the truck. Sandra had written me a letter, an actual letter handwritten on cream-colored stationery, sent to Diana's office address because she did not have our new one. She wrote that she had retained an attorney and was proceeding with the divorce. She wrote that she was sorry, not the reflexive self-protective sorry of someone managing liability, but the specific detailed sorry of someone who has had time to understand exactly what they are apologizing for, and has chosen to do so anyway. She wrote that she hoped in time we might find a way to think of her as someone who had done one right thing when it mattered, even if she had done many wrong things before it. I had read the letter twice and then shown it to Evelyn. Evelyn had read it, folded it carefully, and handed it back to me. She did do one right thing, Evelyn had said. That counts for something. I had put the letter in the box with the things worth keeping. On the balcony in December, I looked down at my hands. 67 years old, the knuckles a little more pronounced than they used to be, the skin a little looser, the arthritis in the right hand, announcing itself more insistently in cold weather than it did when I was 50. Hands that had drafted load calculations and mixed mortar, and held a newborn son, and been locked in handcuffs on a summer night and pressed flat on a conference table, while a lawyer confirmed that someone had stolen my name and used it to take what was mine. These same hands. Still here. I have spent 40 years understanding that the integrity of a structure depends not on whether it is tested, but on whether it holds when tested. A wall that has never borne weight proves nothing. A wall that has carried the full load of everything thrown at it and is still standing, that wall has proven something permanent about itself. I am 67 years old. I was born in a country that asked its citizens to build things meant to last. I built bridges and schools and apartment buildings and one house on Marengo Avenue in Pasadena that I built with my own hands and lived in for 37 years and sold in October of this year without regret, because the home was never the building. The home was the life we chose to live inside it. And that life, the 35 years of Evelyn's hands in mine, the Sunday mornings and the Tuesday night dancing and the 37 Christmases and the cold coffee and the yellow carnations bought from a gas station on Wilshire Boulevard, because I could not show up to my wife's hospital room empty-handed, that life was ours. It had always been ours. Michael could not take it. He had tried. He had tried with considerable ingenuity and considerable desperation and a degree of planning that in another context might have been something I was proud of. He had not taken it. Some things cannot be taken. The kitchen window slid open and Evelyn leaned out. "Patricia wants to know if we are coming for Christmas," she said. Her voice carried the easy warmth of a woman who has recently remembered what easy warmth feels like. "Tell her yes," I said. Evelyn smiled, the real one, the one that reaches all the way to her eyes, and disappeared back inside. I turned back to the water. The December sun was fully up now, sitting low and golden over the Pacific, the way the winter sun does in California, unhurried and generous, making the surface of the water look like it has been hammered out of something precious. A pelican moved across the horizon in a long, unhurried arc, and I watched it until it was gone. I thought about the people who had stood with us through this, Frank with his 4 monitors and his 35 years of knowing exactly where to look, Margaret with her camera and her 3 copies and her refusal to look away from what she had seen, Diana, who had walked into the worst 5 months of our lives and built something that held, Pastor Whitfield, who had known when to speak and when to simply put his hands on my shoulders and be present, Detective Ochoa, who had followed the evidence where it led, even when it meant acknowledging he had been wrong, and Evelyn, who had pulled a blue box out from under the bed and placed it on the kitchen table and said, "We are both his victims," and then stood up in our living room 4 days later and said, "Get out of my house," and then sat beside me on courthouse steps in November and said, "Where do we go from here?" and then said Santa Barbara with a smile that told me she was ready to go there. I have been asked since all of this became part of our history whether I regret anything, whether I would have done something differently, whether there was a moment when I could have seen what was coming and moved to prevent it before it reached the night of the 4th of July weekend and the sound of police radios on Marengo Avenue. The honest answer is that I do not know. I love my son. I love my son. Those two sentences are both true simultaneously, which is one of the more difficult things about being a parent. The love does not stop because the person has done something that cannot be undone. It changes shape. It becomes something you carry differently, but it does not stop. What I know is this: I am 67 years old, and I am sitting on a balcony in Santa Barbara in December, with warm coffee in the Pacific Ocean in front of me and my wife's voice coming through the kitchen window, and the structure that matters most, the one that was worth building, the one that was worth defending, the one that is still standing after everything that was thrown at it, is intact. Some things cannot be taken. That is the only lesson I know how to offer, and I offer it honestly as a man who has learned it the hard way, which is the only way it seems to stay learned. If there is someone in your life who is carrying more than they are telling you, an aging parent, a spouse who has been quieter than usual, a person you love who seems smaller than they used to be, please do not wait for the phone call in the night. Please do not wait for the police lights. Go to them. Ask them directly. Sit down with them and look them in the eye and ask them what is really going on. Because the people who love us most are often the last to ask for help. And because some walls, if you catch them early enough, can be reinforced before they fall. From my family to yours, thank you for being here. Thank you for staying with us through all of it. I hope you will never need any of what I have learned. And I hope that if you do, you will remember that the load-bearing elements of a life are stronger than they look, and that they hold, and that they hold, and that they hold. God bless you all. I carried this family story for a long time before I found the courage to tell it. Not because I am proud of what happened, I am not. Family betrayal at this level leaves marks that never fully disappear. There were nights I sat alone asking myself where I went wrong as a father. I still do not have a complete answer, but here is what I believe as a 67-year-old man who has been through the fire and come out the other side by the grace of God still standing. Do not wait. Do not assume that love alone protects the people you cherish. Check on your aging parents. Ask your spouse the questions that feel too hard to ask, because family betrayal does not announce itself. It builds quietly in small decisions over many months, until one night the police lights are on your street and everything you trusted is in question. This story is my story. I lived it, and if even one person watching today chooses to make that phone call to ask that question to sit down with someone they love before it is too late, then telling it was worth every painful word. If this story reached your heart today, please share it. Leave a comment below and subscribe so stories like this always find their way to you. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. Note: some stories on this channel include fictional elements crafted solely for educational and entertainment purposes. If this content is not right for you, we respect that completely.